Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start the meeting at 4 o'clock. One of our council members is going to be about 15 minutes late, but we'll be here and do have a quorum in any council. This is our joint study session of the City Council and the Audit Finance Committee. It's a special study session to over the budget, proposed budget season kickoff, and it's at 4 o'clock on March 5th. May I have the roll call, please, for the council?
Councilmember Goley, note is absent, will be here late. Councilmember Whitmer. Yeah. Councilmember Hawkins. Here. Vice Mayor Holland.
Here.
Mayor Lewis.
Here.
I'll do
So thank you all for coming. The first item, well, let's take some public comments before going into the agenda. Public comments can be emailed directly to council or in person. It's reserved for persons wishing to address the council on any matter that is on the agenda today. Speaker's time is limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may also speak when the item comes up on the agenda. And do I have any members of the public who'd like to make a comment at this point? Seeing anyone online? Okay, great. So we will just dive right in. The first item is the fiscal year 25-26 budget kickoff and overview, and I'm going to just hand it over to our finance director, Robert. Third.
Before budget calendar, that one's not working. It's not as good. Okay. Sorry, as we adjust. I just wanted to kind of reiterate, this is a high-level overview. You have your staff report, and the staff report, it's a high-level overview of the budget, and it's not intended to be a detailed discussion, but it focused on some forecasts that we have in our 5-year outlook. Again, we look at our focus on revenues, our assumptions for the next 5 fiscal years. And again, this was what you see here isn't predicated on what will be part of as far as the actual expenditure budgets that we have in this coming fiscal year for 25-26. Let's see. Oh, next slide. I didn't hook up to the, there we go. So that's the budget process calendar. Again, we were focusing on the fiscal year general fund balance. The general fund, the town's general fund is the major focus of this. And so just wanted to show you that at mid-year, and this, you have the slides in front of you, but at mid-year, we projected our revenues to increase. They went from 25.5 million to 26.3 million. Our expenditures went from 21.19 million to 21.2 million. That was the increase about 183,000 in additional appropriations. And then you see here the 5.3 million. The 5.3 million is our transfers out. That includes 861,000 for our COP debt on the town center project. And then the remaining 4.5 million is our allocation from our to our CRP projects. So it produces, we anticipated a 24-25 budget deficit of 830,000. And now at mid-year, we project only 196,000 deficit in our net revenue over expenditures for fiscal year 24-25. The next slide is our fund balance and reserves for fiscal year 24-25. With the, as just mentioned, our expenditures increased 21.2 million. Our projected fiscal year ending fund balance is at 12.4 million. And again, in the staff report, I listed the reserve requirements. Both of our reserves are at 15% in the staff report. The emergency was listed at 15%, and the contingency headline was at 20%, but is actually 15%, and the calculation in the staff report is correct. So we have a 3.1 million emergency reserve, 15% also contingency reserve of expenditures at 3.1 million. So our total reserve requirement is 6.3 million, and we're anticipating our unallocated fund balance at the end of this fiscal year 24-25 is 6.039 million. Again, with the staff report, there's more detailed descriptions of our major revenue sources, and it was listed in there on the next slide. The property tax revenue is one, building fees and our ERAF are considered our major revenues. And in the staff report, I kind of discussed on the property tax revenue. We use HDL as our, they provide analysis on our property tax every year. And in the 5-year forecast, we started off at 4.5% in our forecast for property tax. Again, building fees is the next at 9% of our general revenue, and ERAF is at 11% of our total general revenue of 26 million. So 22 million of our revenue comes from these major sources. Again, on the next slide, I'm just showing this is a snapshot of what is in your 5-year forecast spreadsheet, the forecast that was included in your packet. This is just showing as a summary of that total. So you can see as our 24-25 that we projected is at 18.4 million for property taxes, building fees. And then our excess ERAF, we received 2.7 million this year. We had budgeted 2.5 million, so it's above about 271,000 in our revenue. So our total revenues for these three major revenues are at 21.2 million for 24-25, and through the forecast and 29-30, it's at 26.2 million. Again, the property taxes are projected at 4.5% in the first year of the forecast, and the second year is 4.5. Third year is at 5.5, and that's for the remainder of the forecast. In the staff report, it was alluded that the council could look at this projection and augment it to or lower it down from the 5.5 in the fiscal year forecast and the 5-year forecast. Building fees are projected at 4%, 3%, 3%, and then 2 in the last 2 years. Again, ERAF is set at 2.5 million. And again, this is revenue that we put below the line in the 5-year forecast spreadsheet. Even though this year we came at 2.7, 2.5 million is a viable budget amount to put in for our forecast. So it's 2.5 million throughout the 5-year forecast, which equates to 12.5 million total for the next 5 years of ERAF. Again, on this, I want to point out on property taxes, VLF is a big component also. We've been facing shortfalls. It was listed in the staff report. We have a 1.4 million shortfall in there, and I will be addressed further down in the presentation. The next slide projects our other revenue sources in our 5-year forecast. What was listed in there shows in our 5-year forecast in the staff report showed our revenues from sales tax, franchise fees, business license, and other revenue at 5.1 million in the 24-25. That's what we projected out for this remainder year. And then the remaining part of the 5-year forecast, you can see, goes to 5.15 million in the forecast. Projections are conservative, 1 to 2% for these revenues. Planning revenues are at 2 to 3% and are based on historical amounts we've received currently and in the past. So it's based on workflow years in the forecast. The other revenue highlight item in here includes our intergovernmental, police, and miscellaneous revenue. Those can be followed through in the chart. That's a big spreadsheet that you'll have in the packet.
So Robert, did you say that's in the other category?
Yes, ma'am. The other categories includes police revenue, intergovernment revenue, and all our miscellaneous revenue, which is interest, play school rental income, and cell site rental income, our what is it? The time limit construction, sorry, also is in this revenue category. So in the next slide, I'm showing you the major revenue sources that we're monitoring, as I mentioned earlier, just a minute ago, about what we need to focus on. So property tax revenues continues to be monitored. We look at that every year. Currently, right now, we projected in the current fiscal year budget 24-25 at 4.5%. We're using that same percentage in the next 2 fiscal years in the outlook, and then 5.5% in the last 3 years. So that will be continued to be monitored. As mentioned earlier, the VLF shortfall, that's another revenue that's part of the property tax roll-up. We're at a 1.4 million shortfall, and that includes 704,000 in fiscal year 23-24 and 750,000 for 24-25. So as mentioned and highlighted in the staff report, these are revenues that when we have a shortfall, the cities and the county government use our legislator, our government lobbyists, sorry, thank you, lobbyists to help us with the state legislator to put this into the state's budget. So the last couple of years, we've been able to do that. So this 23-24, we're hoping that this 704,000 will be put into this fiscal year budget for 26-25. As well as the shortfall that we are experiencing in this current year. We budgeted, as during the mid-year, we budgeted knowing that the shortfall was going to occur for this current fiscal year. But just wanted to highlight that this is a revenue that we continue to monitor going forward each year. On the positive note is the ERAF. We continue to treat it as one-time revenue, and it's at 2.5 million. This year, as mentioned earlier, that we received 2.7 million, 77 million. So in this forecast and in this upcoming budget, we're going to budget it at 2.5 million. Another thing that we noted was the franchise fee in the staff report. It was reduced to 5% for the refuse contract. It was amended. And so this is a reduction of about 190,000 per fiscal year in our 5-year forecast. So we're taking note of that going forward. So in the staff report, it listed about 430,000 we would receive towards the garbage refuse. Now it's about 230,000 going forward.
Rob, how does ERAF and VLF relate to each other?
So ERAF, VLF is used, the state uses VLF funds to fund the schooling. And so when there's a shortage of the VLF funds, they're using that funds to fund the schools. And that's our different agencies, that's their actual revenue funds. And when they're doing that, they're using the VLF to fund it and then creating the shortfall. And ERAF, all the excess ERAF is also going towards that. And there's just enough excess ERAF in our agencies and our counties. There's 4 counties that have excess ERAF, but they're using VLF to backfill the schools, make the schools whole. And again, the VLF, I don't know if we all recall in 2005 when the governor did the swap, they swapped property taxes for VLF fees with cities to pay off the bonds at the time. And so that is where the VLF has been growing. And because of that, the cities, that city's revenue that they are obligated, that they should be receiving. We're not receiving all that revenue because they're using those pool of funds to fund school districts, their basic aid. And when they don't, when they do that, the basic aid schools, when they become basic aid, that means there's not enough property taxes to fund the schools. So we're getting more school districts are becoming basic aid. And it used to be the opposite, non-basic aid schools. So that's where the VLF shortfall is coming in, is it's the funding of the schools through the counties, the calculations of the property taxes.
So the state's actually then, in order to fulfill that shortfall, they're proposing legislation to attack excess ERAF.
Correct.
That agencies receive in order to fill that backfill hole. So what's happening is they're reducing
Right.
the excess ERAF in order to fill their own BLF hole that they've got to pay. Excess ERAF is ours. Actually, BLF is ours. So we're
Mhm.
arguing on both sides to try and get our revenue.
Mhm.
And so when they're paying us back BLF, they're paying us back with our own money and reducing our excess ERAF. That's what they're trying to push through. And so the county and the lobbyist firms are arguing with the state each year about that legislation, trying to get that opposed.
Or they have done that.
Correct.
And basic aid schools.
I don't think so. I think all of ours, because of our property tax levels
Right.
and the counties that have excess ERAF.
Yeah, all they
Because of the
offer the
property values
schools.
in here in the counties like ours and Marin,
Right, yeah.
they're not flipping over as
Yeah.
fast.
Right.
But the hole is statewide and that's the hole they're trying to fill.
Okay, but that's what I mean, Councilmember Widmer, that Menlo Park schools, they're very wealthy. Okay, and so they are not classified as basic aid. The only school that I would maybe potentially consider would be Adelante or the Selby Lane School. Encinal is part of Menlo Park, right? So, yeah,
But it's, remember,
but
it's
you're,
statewide.
I know,
Yeah.
but but somehow we're insulated a little bit more.
We're insulated in terms of the VLF and the counties not being shifted the way it is in other counties, but excess ERAF is only in about four
counties
around
throughout the state.
Anyway, yeah,
That's the pool of money the state's targeting.
that they're
those
trying to.
statewide, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You have a, excuse me, and then Vice Mayor would like to make a comment.
Okay, so a couple of years ago, they said they were expanding ERAF coverage to cover charter schools, and there are a number of charter schools in our county. And is that still the case, and are any of them getting any fund, do we know?
Charter schools, that's different,
The-
isn't it?
The charter schools is still different. They're still arguing that,
Yeah.
that one, the charter schools, the counties feel that the charter schools aren't part of that calculation.
Okay,
So they're still, that's where they're trying to change the legislation to include those.
Vice Mayor.
What are the four counties that are,
There's five.
is it just the
actually.
Bay Area
San
basically?
Mateo,
San Mateo, Santa Clara, Marin,
Napa.
San Francisco, maybe?
We welcome our Councilmember DeGoya, so we can make sure that he's marked present. And Robert, Finance Director, is just going through the first agenda, and he's going through these slides, which you also have a hard copy of. Okay? No, yes.
You
He
did
had
time
20
You're
20
funny.
pages,
You're
and so I
funny.
think we're only halfway through.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, let's
back.
go,
We
Robert.
can start over.
Okay. That might not be a bad idea.
Oh,
What do you think?
all right.
Should we take a
can
vote
do
on
it.
that?
Okay. So, yes, the VLL short, George had bring it back eloquently. Thank you, George. Yes, the excess ERAF, the VLF is a numbers game. And so we're continuing to monitor that, and hopefully legislation will work out in our favor. But as excess ERAF, there's 5 counties. Eventually those counties will dwindle if they change the funding formula for schools. Once they increase the funding formula, it reduces excess ERAF in the different
Okay.
counties. Franchise fee reduction, we talked about that earlier. Grant funds. In your staff report, there was a list of grant funds that the town uses, and that was just listed in there just to let you know that there's some grant funds that we helps augment some operations to the general fund. And also there's grant funds that are facility and for capital needs. that we have that are part of the capital projects as well. And so in those staff reports, those were listed just a high level on some of the grant funds that we have. We have a 240,000 donation. One is 200,000 and one is 40,000. And that is for police wellness program. And so that was listed as a donation that we receive, and we fund a full-time wellness coordinator for our department, police department, and then also for some training and some nutritious meals. That's plus that 40,000 donation. So wanted to point those out, that some of these grant funds augment our operations for our general fund and also, again, our capital needs and facility upgrades as well.
Okay,
And then,
it's good to see that we have so many grants.
Yes.
You know, I was impressed. I think we have 6 or 7 and they're significant. And, you know, you even got something for the housing element, the LEAP one.
yes,
Nice.
housing element, beverage container that we receive. And so those help with some mandated costs that we have
Mhm.
here. And then highlighted in the staff report is about the library funds that we're close to paying off the San Mateo County Advancement of Funds.
Mhm.
And we're at about 1.5 million remaining left to pay off. And we anticipate to pay that off at the end of the 25-26 year. Mhm. So on the next slide, just highlighting the general fund major expenditures are in our 5-year forecast, just percentage to budget.
We need to go to the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Operational areas.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And so the administration is at 6.4% of the budget, down to the building department is at 7.4. Our highest percentage in our budget departments is 49.4% of our expenditure budget is for police department, and 16.9% is public works department. And these tend to be the percentages for agencies as well, public safety and public works. And the next slide, just highlighting our major components of our operational costs. There was a discussion in the expenditure component that we have professional service contracts for building contract, IT services, MCE, which is our public works utility crew, our contract custodial services, landscape services, planning, contract services, legal services, and then we also have building facility maintenance services on our new buildings, maintenance contracts. So in highlighting those, in the staff report highlighted that our planning contract had an increase because we have a new planner contractor. And then also we were taking on the housing element mandate. And so there was some increase in costs on that. So we anticipate in the first future of the forecast, those costs for the state housing element update will decrease in our planning department. Building department discussed about we're currently reviewing the contract for the building services. Again, last year, reminder that we increased our fees last year, first time in the building and planning major fee increase in 12 years. And the current contract with the contract service for building has not been increased in the same amount of time. So we'll highlight those as we go through the operations budget in detail as far as the actual costs. And the next component, major components for operation expenses, just identifiers, the labor costs in the forecast, we have it at 4% in the first 2 years, and then 3.5 and 3% in the following years in the forecast. In pension costs are 25-26 normal costs. Their local miscellaneous is 12.74%. This increased 0.07% from our current fiscal year. We're paying 12.770 in our normal costs for miscellaneous. Public safety increased 0.05% to 29.35% as our normal cost for our CalPERS pension costs. Operation expenditures throughout the forecast are at 4.5% in the first 2 years, 3.5% in the third year, and then 3% in the last 2 years. Our current UAL for CalPERS is projected at 1.8 million. That is broken out to 608,000 for our miscellaneous plan, and then public safety at 1.2 million. In the staff report, staff discussed the 5 million payment to CalPERS that we made. It reduced our costs by 356,000 in the first fiscal year of 22-23, 422,000 in 23-24, and 322,000 in 24-25. Staff communicated that at the time, last year at this time, it was reduction savings of 1.57 million. In the staff report, the savings is about 1.4 million now. So it's a reduction about 146,000.
Councilmember Whitmer,
Yeah,
yes.
Robert, on page 17, you know.
You could, yeah.
On page 17 of the staff report, you noted that our overall liability now has gone up over 19 million.
Mhm.
Which is an increase of over $1 million from last year. And I know that a volunteer, Mr. Polito, was working on some recommendation, and just not putting any pressure on him because he's not on the committee or anything like that, but he volunteered to do this, and I was just wondering if we have a time frame for us to make a decision on what to do, as we'll soon be allocating up ERAF and things like that.
Yep. No, thank you for the question.
Finance meeting on the 18th. Those are
We're in-
requested projections. We can do our own
Yeah.
projections, but I wanted on CalPERS letterhead.
Yeah, yeah.
Requested projections for $1, $2, and $3 million ADPs. Robert just got them today, so we haven't had a chance to look at it.
Yeah.
But we will have a recommendation on the 18th. I would like to make one comment, though.
Oh, we have to, microphone, sorry.
Got to push the button.
Thanks, Bill. The savings that are mentioned in the staff report and that Robert just briefly mentioned, those are grossly understated. The proper way to do it is to calculate what the payments would have risen to if we hadn't made the $5 million payment, and then do the comparison. And it will turn out to be exactly what Julian Robertson predicted. In other words, it's math, so it doesn't lie. They do everything at the discount rate of 6.8%. So when he gives us an amount of savings, in essence, what they did, all our pension liabilities are in layers. The money we owe those layers are like mortgages. The money that we've made, when CalPERS makes more than 6.8%, those are like CDs paying 6.8%. So when we made that $5 million payment, we paid off 5 mortgages completely and 1 partially. And this savings we have on a spreadsheet, the reduction in payments over the life of those mortgages was in the neighborhood of $11 million. And the savings over the 5-year period that Robert's referring to would be roughly $750,000 more than the numbers he's quoting. So these ADPs actually work, and these liabilities aren't going to go away. So if we have $6 million in cash laying around, as it appears we will have at the end of this fiscal year, to make an ADP in April again would be, I think, a wise thing to do. We also might benefit positively for those 2 months, April, May to the end of June, roughly 2 months. We'll get allocated a certain amount of the gain or loss on whatever ADP we make. When we did it several years ago, it was a loss. So we got a larger share of the loss. It ate up some of our $5 million. I'm expecting that this year it would be just the opposite. We'll get a share of the gain, so.
I'll just make a comment, maybe a question for Mr. Polito and the Finance Committee. If we actually had a savings of 11 million, right? I mean, yeah, for doing that 5 million, Can we cash in on that somehow? The $11 million in savings that you indicated we made, where is that? Is it in a bank and can we go get it out?
It's over a
It's over,
period of
yeah.
time and it's.
No, it's not in a bank.
Production.
Yeah,
Operational.
it's just interest essentially that we won't have to pay.
It's interest we won't have to pay.
It's-
I mean, but that is significant. I mean, it's really, Councilmember Whitmer, I've got to hand it to you. I mean, you were really kind of the mastermind around it. Well, I think with the finance committee. too.
Well, again,
No.
the liabilities are in layers.
Mhm.
And so the fact that we didn't do as well as projected, his projections were spot on. If
You hit it.
CalPERS made exactly 6.8% on our money each year, the predictions would have been right on. But right away, we lose 6.2%, or I think it was. And if you look at those layers and add them onto his projection, you'll get to exactly what our UAL payment requirement is in any given year. So it's very precise.
Councilmember DeGolia, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, so.
We're going to turn your little.
I hear what Bob said, and it sounds like the reduced costs aren't exactly the fact, what the avoided costs are higher than that. And I think, yeah, no, I hear you. And we should have that laid out when it comes back to us, consideration. Really understand it, because I just took the math here and looked at, like in the last year, 322,000, that's about 6%. That's not the right.
No.
And that's the only numbers we have, so it's not possible to do an actual assessment without getting the.
But the payment, the reduction in payments, these payments we don't have to make are spread over the entire
Yes.
amortization period of each mortgage we pay off.
Mhm.
Now, CalPERS, one of the other things they like to fiddle with is the amortization period. Some years it's been 30, some years it's been 25. Right now, I think they're running at 20 on the newest layers. So those savings are in future years, a ways down the road. And if we had runaway inflation like we kind of fiddled with last year, you'd have to do some net present value calculations to figure out whether the savings were that great. But when the interest rates and inflation have been like they have been for the past 10 years, I think it's a no-brainer, particularly at that time, we paid it off with 2% money. Now we're going to be paying it off with, you got most of your money in LAIF, and I think it finally got to 4% for a while, but I think it's back under 4 now. So that's kind of the comparison. We wouldn't be trading 6.8% debt for 2% debt. It's going to be for the earnings we could get with the money in the bank.
These tables that Bob's talking about that show these different layers, references of mortgages are actually in our CalPERS actuarials that we receive every year. So you can identify the highest ones
Right.
that you want to pay off.
Mhm. And what's in the staff report is just comparison year over year for these couple years.
Okay.
And they change because it was listed in the staff report, the actuarial reports show every year they show the first projection. So they tell you what your costs are for the upcoming fiscal year, 25, 26. Those numbers are hard numbers, percentage, UAL. The second number is a projection for 26, 27. So this next year, when we get our new actuarial report, that 26, 27 it may change. It may go down, it may go up based off of how every year those, the actuarial reports get reviewed and get calculated. So they always give us the first 2 years, and then within that report, they forecast, okay, what's your UAL for the next 5 years based off of the same
But,
6.8%.
Again, it's really important. The numbers going backwards don't change. What changes is the next year's performance
Right.
creates either a gain or loss, and
And that starts for
and
20 years.
multiple entries, and those layers get added on. That's what changes.
Yeah.
So there's not any funny math.
Yeah.
And it's going to be important in the next few slides to keep that $6 million number that Bob mentioned.
Right. In your head.
In your head, because we're going to talk about,
Mhm.
we have that financial spreadsheet that we put together, we bring back to you when we talk about operations a couple weeks from now. That's going to identify where we're going to put our CIP money over the next 5 years, what projects we're going to do, and then exactly how much unallocated general fund balance you have to play with to do something like an ADP without sacrificing your capital projects. So we'll
Or
get to
if we
that in a
want to
couple of
decide
slides.
to use that 6 million to plow into more
Not
CIP.
have, yeah.
So yeah,
exactly.
correct. We might not have that.
Okay,
So
let's
on the
go
ne-
on.
Yeah, on the next
Thank you.
slide, I was going to get to all that. Thanks for
So where are we?
for being ahead of that, Mr. Widmer. So this is just our unfunded liability, accrued liability
Did that, right?
for the next 5 fiscal years. 24, 25, we paid 1.5 million. 25, 26, our UAL payment's going to be 1.83 million. So you can see it's 1.2 million for public safety in 25, 26, and miscellaneous 618,000. So those 25, 26 numbers are actual numbers, what we have to pay next year. 24, 25 is what we paid this year. And then the next remaining 4 years, 26, 27 through 29, 30 are our estimates based off of our recent actuarial report.
Okay.
They're invoiced at the beginning of each fiscal year. We get a discount if paying it up front, or we could pay it monthly. We pay it up front and we take the discount. So we saved about $70,000 in paying it up front for 24, 25. So our total pension liability is at 19.1 million. As Mr. Widmer had mentioned, it was at 18 million last year, so it went up about $1 million. The next slide, just kind of highlight overview of our reserve balances. This is our general fund balances. We have 15% is emergency reserve, 15% is an operating reserve. So we have a 30% total reserve fund balance that we reserve. And then anything but after that is unallocated fund balance. Any remaining balance not reserved is what we commit or specify and assign to other projects or needs within the community. And that's what George was alluding to, is the unallocated fund balance is what we take and we say, okay, if this amount we're going to allocate to so much to CIP and then how much to each individual project. So again, this will be brought out, this spreadsheet, financial spreadsheet will be updated and brought out at our next operations budget and our CIP meetings. So the next couple slides, this next slide, the summary and forecast, this is just taking what's in that spreadsheet and just showing you the flow through of our total revenue at 24, 25 is 26.3 million. And then our salaries and benefits, our operation expense of 9.81 million, CalPERS UIL payment, 1.519 million, our debt service, 861,000. And then the CIP allocation for this fiscal year was 4.45 million. So you take all that minus revenue minus all those expenditures, our net fund balance is 196,000 negative for the fiscal year. And then through the flow through of this forecast, you can see in 25, 26, it's a negative 362. And by 29, 30, it's a negative 723,000. And again, as I mentioned earlier, projections are not actual expenditures. They're just any, requirements that we're using in the forecast to help us through the budget process. They may change as we go through each budget cycle.
That second to the last line there, that CIP allocation other,
Oh, yes.
that is from that fiscal forecast spreadsheet that we did last year,
Mhm.
where we identified the CIP projects we want to put money toward over the next 5 years in big buckets, drainage and streets and roads, bike lanes, whatever, in the big buckets. And so that's what the numbers we plugged in. Those may change
Right.
when we get to our operations and CIP meetings coming up. That's as they stand currently. So the next slide, Anthony, is
Yeah, next
where
slide,
Bubba's going to
Anthony,
go to, is going to show you the remaining unallocated fund balance that flows through once we make all of those.
That's at 6 million.
Yeah. So we take each year's projected over or under, gives you our estimated ending fund balance of 12.4 million. And then the remaining unallocated is 6,039,000 for 24, 25. And as 25, 26, it's going to be 5.5 million unallocated balance left over. And then 26, 27, 6 million. And then all the way when we get to the end of the forecast, the unallocated balance is 3.9 million.
So
Okay.
the
so-
last time we did this presentation last year,
We
the
did.
council's comment was, "Hey, what about that fiscal outlook spreadsheet? Because we're showing, we got 25, $30 million at 5 years out. That's a big target. What are we doing with that?" So now we've plugged in those numbers from that fiscal outlook spreadsheet. And you can truly see what our unallocated available balance may be.
Does this take into account that, say, 24, 25, we've got $6 million. If we use that, spend it, you know, either for the pension fund reductions or on CIP, then how does that affect 25, 26?
It flows all the way through.
So 25, 26.
Or a
will- yeah,
negative million
Will be a
on
negative.
that?
Instead of it being 5.5 million, it'd be negative. We be,
It'd be upside down.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
correct.
Each column is not of its own.
Correct.
So, yeah, so what you spend in 24, 25 is going to affect all the rest of them going forward, right?
Robert,
Yes.
So,
you're always conservative in projections, and you've projected under by about 200,000. How much better could it be?
I'm hoping it could be positive, maybe 3 to 500,000. Again, it's based off of how we are operationally. We run as lean as we can on net expenditures. And so that's where if we don't make it up in revenue with property tax increases, we make it up through our operations. But we already run lean as we are over the last 10 years. But the 196, yeah, it could be a positive 500,000. And then that will get updated and it'll flow through the remaining fiscal years.
Depends on ERAF.
ERAF could go
this
higher.
Came in 200,000 over
Over.
our projections. So it's got a plus
Yeah.
or minus maybe $500,000.
Right. And then, you know, if we get our shortfall in the VLF, that's 1.4 million. You add that 1.4 million to this 196,000.
It's
you know,
1.6.
there you go. And so,
It's also less.
There we don't get to in any particular fiscal year, it
Correct.
might get pushed or we choose not to do.
right. And then we adjust, yeah, to, you know, the priority projects of the council.
Committing that $6 million number,
Right.
that's gone.
Yeah,
Then,
it's over.
then how does that make 2025 look?
20,
This is our general.
25, 26, I
Unallocated
meant
balance.
25,
Yeah.
26.
Yeah. It'll make it, if we take that 6 million that you see there,
we're eating into reserves.
yeah,
Will
Yeah.
eat into the reserves.
Yeah.
Okay.
that's eating to the reserve.
Not the 15% reserves.
Or no, the 30%.
Those
It's eating,
15%.
it's taking away what's left after those reserves. Because you see that estimating fund balance of 12.4 million? That is the total fund balance. When you back out the 30%,
Mm.
the remaining balance is 6,039,000. So that's the unallocated available.
So my,
Either 15,
Unless,
coming out of the unallocated.
Yeah, they already took.
the unallocated, because the 15% and 15% reserves, in my mind, are for emergency. I mean, like if the world stopped and we couldn't collect anything and we had to operate for at least a month or 2, 3
Right.
months.
so
But they already took.
if you allocated it though in this fiscal year, that $6 million that you're talking about, 6.039, you got $39,000 in unallocated balance, give or take, starting 25, 26.
Right.
So that's going to flow through. You've got less than $6 million at the end of 25, 26, which is the year we're budgeting for. So in that year, we would be hitting our reserves if all these numbers were exact.
Correct.
Right.
But
Right.
you said the net ROE.
Correct.
Okay.
They're conservative on the revenue and they're over,
We're never, yeah.
not
Right.
conservative on the.
Not in
I guess
not
what I'm
in
saying
any
is be
one
careful
year.
with that
Nice if
6
we got
million
down
because
there.
it's a
To be kind
On
of
money we're not gonna get
feel
back.
skinny.
Yeah, but they said they
You
were
are-
looking at $1, $2, and $3
Let's also
million
see
the scenario-
investment, so
spend it
they're
in
not
one
talking
year.
about
It's
six.
like
Correct.
$6 million
So
over
I think this is kind
6
of a
years.
So we
discussion.
don't ever
Yeah,
get there.
the scenarios, we're looking at
Okay.
1 to 3 million.
All right, we got to bring this back and thank you. Is that all? I think, because I
Yeah,
see a
the
pretty
last
picture at
slide,
the end.
Just telling you that we're, operations budget will be at our April 2nd meeting.
Yep.
Our capital improvement budget's the May 7th study session. And then the budget study session in June 4th brings everything back up together for review again and then adoption, hopefully June 18th. Years going
Thank
going
you.
by fast.
Okay, so thank you, Robert, for all of your hard work and everything. I'll open it up now to any public comments, if we have any online or here in the room. Questions? We'll bring it back to council. I think we've had a discussion, so I think council has said what they wanted to do, so we will move on. If they're okay, we'll close this item and we will open the second item on our agenda, which is our to provide feedback and direction regarding construction regulations. Oh, those are always fun. Regarding utility services required for development projects. So Robert Ovadia, we've got the two Roberts flanking the city manager. Robert, talk to us about this. This is a
great.
new twist, isn't it? A little bit.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. What we're looking for is a little bit of feedback and direction regarding underground utility service connection requirements for development and redevelopment. In our Atherton Municipal Code, we have a variety of construction regulations that range from work hours to screening requirements, noise, signage, et cetera. And part of that is a requirement for underground utility services for new construction. And so specifically, the code says all telephone, telegraph, electrical wires, and other such services to newly constructed dwellings shall be constructed underground from point of the utility company pole. And it applies to all dwellings where building permits have not been issued prior to the date of the ordinance, which is back in 1966.
Wow.
So this is a regulation that we've had in place for more than 50 years, right? And so this ordinance was likely enacted for a multitude of reasons that range from reducing the proliferation of overhead wires in town, aesthetic issues, as well as public safety and resiliency, because overhead wires are susceptible to wind and knocking things into them, such as tree limbs and other things that can affect our residents in terms of their utility services. So as stated, the ordinance prohibits the installation of new overhead service wires, which are the wires that run from poles to houses. And we interpret that to also mean the extension of overhead services. So if you have overhead services that stop at a pole, we are saying don't extend that pole line and extend services. And so we also are concerned about when folks come in that the closest utility services that are available overhead may not be directly in front of their property. It may be a pole line that's across the street or down the street. And so what they'll often do is try and push for the most efficient and cheapest solution, which may be throw a pole in the pole line across the street in front of their neighbor's house to take that underground and into their property. And so we are concerned that the most expedient way causes impacts to the neighbors. And so we try and work with developers and PG&E to find solution that minimize new poles and or facilities that are not directly impacting just that developer, but affecting others. PG&E has a variety of regulations that kind of impact where and how overhead services can be brought underground. And so, for example, the wires that most developments need now I'll call them the top string wires, the primary power. And to bring that down underground, it has to be pretty much on what we call a clean pole, meaning that there's no transformers and other things on that pole in the way of bringing those wires underground. With the sizes of new development and other existing developments, the proliferation of overhead transformers, they're prevalent throughout town, which limits the ability, the number of clean poles that are available to bring wires down. So what we've done is we've kind of highlighted a few real world type scenarios, and we do, as indicated, we work with the developers and PG&E to find kind of that least impactful solution. So scenario one is a flag lot, which is currently served underground at the tail end of the flag with like a 200 amp service or something, but the new service requirements are significantly higher. So their new service requirement, they're indicating is about a 600 amp service plus another 320 for their accessory unit. And the power line that's currently coming in to that property is not sufficiently sized. And the property, the closest pole where the termination is, has a transformer. So it's not an easy, well, just connect to the nearest pole, which is about 150 feet or so away from the edge of the flag. But we worked with them and with PG&E, and the solution that we have is basically to take that transformer off the pole, take those wires underground to the front of that flag, which is actually going to be, it's within a utility easement on their property in front of their gate. So they'll take that transformer, put in a new pad mount transformer and the transformer that's required to serve the property without adding overhead wires. So the initial request was, well, we want to tap into that pole, extend the overhead wires into our property so that we can put their transformer in. The concern that we had is now you're bringing new overhead wires in front of your neighbor to do that, right? So if somebody's used to not having overhead wires and now get it, that is a little bit of an issue. I do want to highlight that we have folks from building here, Public Works, and then online, we have a representative from PG&E. He raised his hand. I'd like to get through the staff report and then you can ask for comments or ask questions as you see. The next scenario we have is at a cul-de-sac where all the existing, let's see here. Yeah, so this here is a cul-de-sac where all the overhead wire, all the poles on that cul-de-sac have transformers on them, so PG&E can't bring that primary down. The request was, let's put a new pole in front of that neighbor across the street so that they can easily come down and come into the property. And so the solution that we worked out was there's a clean pole at the end of the cul-de-sac, tie into that, bring those primary wires down the cul-de-sac and into the property. And so that actually is under construction. So that was resolved. Then the third scenario is, again, another flag lot. This one comes out to a street. And there's actually a pole right at the driveway entry to that flag lot, but it has a transformer. So the request was, can we take that transformer off, bring primary power across the street, put a pad-mounted transformer in front of that property, and bring in the primary bring the power into the property. We are generally opposed to above-ground transformers. And so we suggested that, well, if you're going to do that, do it underground. PG&E is now trying to move away from underground transformers. But the interesting component is that property across the street was actually vacant. And so that project was starting the development process. And so they were going to need a large amount of power as well. The solution that I believe has been worked out is now it'll be a larger underground transformer in front of that property, but intended to be able to serve both. The last scenario that we have
Can I
for,
ask a question about that? When you move the transformer pole to a location across the street, in this case underground, or under the pole, as I think your first was, does the wire from that existing property where you're taking the high wire and moving it underground, is it going underground or is it going over?
so what we're talking about are things that are already going underground. So from that transformer, the wires actually go underground. And so what we're doing
It's going
is,
to keep them going underground, but you move.
yeah.
I have another question. Why is PG&E not wanting their transformers underground?
I will let PG&E answer that after we get through the
Okay.
next scenario.
Be ready.
We do have PG&E on the line. So Bill, thank you for being there and participating. So the last scenario is another property at the end of a cul-de-sac. The cul-de-sac is actually undergrounded. And so the nearest
The
overhead,
SAC is actually what?
the properties at the end of that, on that cul-de-sac are actually served underground.
And it's undergrounded.
Yeah. So the power needs for this development project, PG&E's recommendation was the Atherton Channel runs behind the property. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure if the power that comes into that property is currently overhead from that line, but the pole line is on the opposite side of the channel. And so various iterations, initial is come in overhead from that existing pole over the channel, new pole on property to bring it down into a transformer to serve the house underground. Iterations back and forth asking PG&E, can you go from the existing pole under the channel? The answer was no. Can you do a small bridge, like a,
Pipe or something over
I'm
the
gonna say,
channel.
go over the channel with a nominal structure with conduit so that we don't have the overhead stuff? The answer to that was no. The initial look for the alternate location for bringing in service was almost 800 feet away. But we found another location, a transformer probably about 250 feet away in the cul-de-sac, which is a potential. PG&E needs to verify whether or not that's doable. And so we have the developer here saying that that likely may not be the case.
We originally, when we say developing this, by the way, it's for a client.
Yeah.
We expected to go to that transformer location because I built the house that needed that transformer 10 years ago. And then.
So that's it. So I'll continue and
And then we'll
we
open it
will,
up
we
for
will
wait,
invite you to
George,
participate.
we'll-
The only thing
yeah.
is that as participants, we'd like you to participate on the mic so that people can hear you. And so we do have the developer of that project here to answer questions specifically related to that project. The point of this conversation is to talk about the issues that folks are facing. We do our best to try and work with both the developer and PG&E to find a solution that minimizes impacts to the public. But we also don't have a process by which we can vary from our code. And so if the desire is to develop a process, we'd like to have that conversation with you to see what you might think that would look like. We want to be careful that such a process doesn't encourage folks to go through it.
Go through
To
it.
go through it, meaning that if you give folks an easy path, they'll take the path of least resistance. And so just being conscious of that, because everybody wants projects to happen and want projects to happen quickly. And unfortunately, PG&E is sometimes one of those long legs of lead time, both on the engineering side and the implementation side. So it's not uncommon from when you put in your application, it's a year and a half until you get power. Okay. And so we encourage folks to start that process as quickly as possible, because it does ultimately impact their development, and they could be halfway through the construction of the structure before the power is available.
Are
Okay.
you finished? Well, we're going to, okay, go ahead. We're gonna let-
And so
So then-
that concludes
I just,
the presentation on the staff report. I'm available to answer
The
questions.
vice mayor
building-
has a question for you.
you kept saying we, like looking at the map and then
Yeah.
so who is that? Is that the building department, planning department? It's like,
So
Who
it's
would
I'll say it's a combination. All work on private property is regulated via the planning and building departments. Public Works oversees the right of way. And so most of these utility issues start off with a conversation with building and planning, but then end up coming to Public Works because we have to actually permit the construction in the public right of way. And so you say we, city staff, town staff, including building, Public Works, planning, try and navigate this as best as we can.
so you guys like problem solve together and then
Yeah.
pitch it to PG&E and then wait.
And we try and work with everybody to try and figure out what the right answer is.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Robert. This is an interesting conundrum. So I'd like to open it up to the public, any members of the public here in the room who would like to step to the dais and say your name and company you're with and ask any question or make any comments. And there's a mic at the dais.
Just got to turn it on.
Yeah.
Ah.
There you go. Thank you.
I'm Rex Finato with Pacific Peninsula Group, and the last example that Robert was giving was actually for a client of ours. I want to first say that staff's really good at working with us. PG&E, I know they're on the line and they're probably well aware of this. They can be difficult to navigate. And that's fine. We're used to it at this point. We know it's going to take 12 to 24 months in some cases to get power. In this particular instance, we actually applied for power probably 4 months before we broke ground on the project. And this is actually a small scale project compared to what we typically build. It's only about 5,000 square feet of structure, 400 amp service. It's like small relative to what we normally do. One, I totally agree with the fact that everything should be undergrounded as much as possible. We begrudgingly underground some stuff that costs us a kind of a small fortune to do in some cases, but I think for the overall community, it's a good thing. In this particular situation, we don't have any avenue to bring power into this property except by way of this last overhead thing. Outside of PG&E making exceptions that they've kind of vehemently said, absolutely not. So we've hit multiple roadblocks with them. So what's kind of unfortunate, and I'd argue unfair for our client, is there's actually no real way to bring power to a property, which is wild to me. So the way that this particular property works, it's on Berry Lane. It's at the end of one of the cul-de-sacs. If all of you know, Berry Lane is fully undergrounded, all the, 20 homes there or whatever it is. But the Atherton drainage channel has an easement that has overhead lines, and that's how it serviced the previous, old ranch home that was there, was serviced overhead.
Somebody to approve.
And when we originally went in to develop this for our client, like I said, I was the one who personally built this 10 years ago, the home next to it. And the transformer he was referring to, at the time, we thought that PG&E was doing what they call a betterment project, meaning our client didn't pay to put that transformer in the street underground. And I was told at the time, did I care that many years into the future what was going to occur? Not necessarily, but that the reason for our client not having to pay for this transformer was that it was meant to service future development on that cul-de-sac. So when our client bought it, we started looking into developing. I was like, oh, we're just going to get power from that transformer. No big deal. I remember it from 8 years ago or 9 years ago. And then we learned from PG&E, no, it's a single use transformer, whatever you'd call it. And I said, well, can we upgrade it, do a bigger vault, bigger transformer, and and our client would pay for all that. I mean, that's not a crazy issue. It'd be kind of absurd to me to bring 400 amps and have to spend several $100,000 for it. But point is that it was going to be an okay thing to do. PG&E said absolutely no underground transformers. And we're like, okay, so what do we do now? One option was potentially go all the way out to Atherton Avenue. So think about, you're going up Atherton Avenue, turn left on Berry Lane, first left. Yeah, he's starting to show it here.
It's on the screen.
Yeah, it's an extremely long distance. $1 million service for 400 amps type of cost. I think that's obscene, by the way. But PG&E on top of that said, we won't do that. It's too long of a run for primary. We won't service something like that. So we're really at this, I'm not, it sounds like I'm making this just about this. And I know that the conversation's larger than this, but point is, I think you guys are going to come across this stuff periodically, especially with the new codes that, kind of toggled back and forth between how much electricity, how many electrical appliances, whether gas is going to be allowed, fast forward 10 years, maybe there won't be any more gas allowed on properties. This is going to become a big issue. So yes, at some point we will need council to comment or make a decision on whether they'll allow this. I guess it'd be a variance of some type for this one particular property. That's not what today is, I think. But anyways, just want to bring it up.
Thank you,
And-
Rex.
And we've built a lot of homes, and we always underground, and we're happy to do it.
We're aware.
This is just like, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, so.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So-
Any other public comments? Or you want to ask him something, Councilmember Diana?
Mike?
Oh, Diana, could you do your mic?
You said that.
Could you speak into your mic?
The transformers?
Yeah, PG&E said they will not underground this transformer, and the way they said it to us is they won't underground any more transformers. I don't know what that statement means. Is that in Atherton? Is it in every jurisdiction in the state? I
Well, we
don't
may
know.
get that answer when we
Yeah.
talk to the PG&E rep online, okay?
Well, hearing from
Yeah.
Robert that there are other underground options, I wasn't even aware
Right.
of that,
Okay,
Let's say on yours specifically, we were hoping that they could tie in or pull primary from in advance of that transformer.
that's what I always hoped too. So,
But I think the last we heard was that it was pretty much at the limit of where they
Yeah.
would want that, but
Okay.
it looks like.
great. Any other, thank you, Rex. And we'll continue the conversation.
I just want
So
to,
Jude?
Jude Keurig, Pacific Peninsula. Getting back to the existing power comes across the channel. The new pole would not be in the right of way. It would be solely on the client's property, virtually invisible to the public because it would be in the back corner. So the power pole across the channel, the neighbors' homes block that existing pole, which is still there, correct? So our new pole would basically be the other end of the bridge that's currently being formed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
20
question.
feet of wire going
Just a question that,
across.
the wire would be high like
You
all
still
the
have to
other high
cross,
tension.
you still have to cross the channel.
Already crossing the channel, you're just gonna replace the drop with a bigger drop.
No, the pole that the power's coming from is on the neighbor's property on the other side of the channel. To get the power to our property, we have to put a new pole on our side of the channel and then go underground from there to the house. So.
And just to clarify, the wires would be high across the channel. You're not gonna
Right, it's probably
bring them
15,
like in a conduit or something across
15,
the
20.
Yeah,
channel.
so our original request, like I said, was, can you go under? Can you put a conduit over?
Right,
so
that's what I
that
heard you say.
And so the answer from PG&E was no. So here's an illustration of the property as it's served now. So there's a pole as indicated in blue on the neighbor's property across the channel. Service went overhead into the property. And so
Directly.
what
just direct.
is being proposed basically is, oops, if I can draw here, putting in, it's not letting me do it. Putting in, there
I
we go.
understand.
I'll try and move it, but basically putting in a new pole on this property on the opposite side of the channel
Mhm.
and undergrounding from that point.
Right.
Running
And-
power from the existing pole.
Taking overhead from the existing
Overhead,
pole,
yeah.
overhead across the channel, new pole on property, undergrounded to a pad mounted transformer on the property.
Councilmember Whitmer.
That house get its power.
Underground from the cul-de-sac. Yes.
Why can't we?
Again, that's what Rex was alluding to.
Talking about,
They
yeah.
actually
Okay.
built that house and put in that transformer in the roadway. And so PG&E was saying that they could not tap into that. We were hoping that they could maybe take primary from the front side, call it the back side of that transformer and just string through with a splice box. But it doesn't sound that that's possible.
Okay, I'm going to just kind of bring us back to
So
the-
I
what
would
we're
like
talking
to,
about.
if through the mayor,
Philosophical, yes.
allow PG&E to
Yes,
provide comment.
absolutely. But I just want to make sure there's no other member of the public that has a comment either online or here in the chambers. Okay, no one online. Okay, so we're going to
No, Bill.
close the public no, because
Bill.
we have the bill from PG&E.
That's not public.
He's staff. Okay, so I'm going to close public comments and we're going to ask the PG&E representative to talk to us.
Hi,
Anthony,
everyone.
can you- Great.
Hi, everyone. Madam Mayor, for the record,
Yes.
I'm Bill Chang, your temporary local government affairs rep.
I know, Bill, hi, how are you? I thought you've already gone. I was hesitant
Well-
to say your last name.
Well, I am my own backup until they find a replacement.
Oh, you're going to be here a long time, I think.
Well, I told my colleagues that I'm here until March 15th, 10 days from now, before I go to China, and that'll be a clean break.
Oh, you're going to become geographically undesirable then, huh?
Well, I'm going to China on vacation, and when I come back, I will be 100% to my new department.
Okay, well, what do you have to tell us and shed light on this?
I should not comment on the particular project because I am not a service planning rep. I am not an engineer. I can't even do math. So, and I know just enough to be dangerous to any project. But I do have a question for the developer. The existing underground transformer you mentioned that PG&E said, no, we can't tap into it. Does that existing underground transformer serve just one customer or one house?
Yes.
Okay. And the PG&E rep who told you that no, we're not going to, well, I understand. I think I know why we can't tap into it, because over the years, the load on that transformer is probably near the edge of it. And so putting another house on it would overload the transformer and cause all kinds of problems. But my question for myself really is, why can't we replace an existing underground transformer with another underground transformer? Just make the hole bigger. I can ask that question on your behalf, and I am happy to do that.
Sounds good. Okay, we have a comment from Councilmember DeGoya, who's been pretty quiet so far.
We could change that.
Okay, let's,
Okay, so my question is, Bill, not to the specific project, where I understand you can't comment on the engineering detail here, but to the policy issue of why PG&E doesn't want to put transformers underground anymore. Because they obviously have been putting transformers underground at times in the past.
We have. It's a combination of reasons. The largest is underground transformers are much more expensive to obtain and to put underground, and any expense, and that's one of the things I wanted to mention for everyone's benefit here. Any kind of expense that PG&E incurs in terms of construction or installation of new facilities, that almost directly translates to your electric bills, because everything comes back in rates. And so
But let me follow it up, because I have experience with PG&E upgrading transformers for a customer, and they charge the customer for the cost.
yes, it depends on the transformer, and it depends on the situation of the project. But the other reason for moving away from underground transformers, other than the cost, is the length of time it requires to obtain an underground transformer. And an underground transformer is also much more expensive and much more difficult to maintain. Underground transformers also, in terms of climate change, underground transformers also are more susceptible to climate change. That sounds funny, and let me explain. When the weather gets hot, as it has been over the past few years, when the weather gets hot and stays hot over the period of a few days, an underground transformer doesn't have time or doesn't have the opportunity to cool overnight when the hot weather becomes less hot. And so that underground transformer basically bakes underground over a few days, and then it fails.
You'd think that you'd have some kind of insulation, material to,
Well,
there's
well,
got to be science around it.
if you see an underground transformer location, you'll see a vented grate over the top of it. So because it has to be vented for obvious reasons, if we try to insulate it, that just stifles the transformer even more.
Got it. Obviously, I don't know the technology. Councilmember Hawkins Manwolian has a question or comment.
In terms of safety, would you agree that the underground are the most safe? I'm talking about transformers. And then would the second be above ground in some sort of container and then the poles? So would that be the order of which you would put them for safety, public safety?
I am not qualified to comment on safety, but I do know that when an underground transformer fails, it can pop. Some people would say that it can explode. The leakage from the transformer can also be a problem, although the newer transformers do have non-toxic insides that if it should leak, it's not as big as a problem as it was in the past. However, it's the cooling aspect of the machinery that takes priority. A transformer has no moving parts, and so it really depends on it's air cooled basically. So when it hangs on a pole, it does have a better opportunity to cool overnight during hot weather.
Say again.
So
Did you want to?
yeah, can you clarify, are you saying that it's less safe underground? And
I
then
should-
more safe above ground, but then less safe in the trees because it's sitting in the canopy?
It's I don't like speaking in absolutes like that, whether it's safe or not. But I can say that when it's overhead, it's more reliable.
But it's also what triggered fires all over the state, correct?
No, that is not correct. The fires all over the state, every fire was different. But from what I do know, that some of the fires were triggered from wires going down, not necessarily a transformer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councilmember Widmer has a comment.
So Bill, can they not have, or Robert, can we not have an on-ground transformer?
Yes, you can. Absolutely. Pad
Why
mounted.
can't
That's
we
what,
put an on-ground transformer?
yes,
There
that's
it goes, John.
that is actually a pad mounted transformer is actually so that's I think Robert uses the term a pad mounted transformer.
Yeah.
And
then you
it's
landscape down.
so a pad mounted transformer is some would call a ugly green cabinet on a concrete pad sitting on somebody's property, whether it's the right of way or some private property. It looks like a green refrigerator.
Okay, so you have an above ground one.
Yeah,
Yes.
so the problem is its location. So for most projects, we're talking about putting these within the right of way in front of somebody's property. Inevitably, it's not the property being developed. And so that's one
Pretty
of the
ugly.
issues.
Yeah.
And so if it could be brought in and put on the developed property,
Mhm.
we don't really have much issue or concern because it's impacting predominantly the person that's doing the project. But if you take that and put it across the street, down the block, it's not the person that's doing the development that is being harmed, it's the resident.
But,
Yeah,
and
but-
that's perfectly understandable. And it also makes our right of way ugly and
So-
spotted with
Okay.
these,
So-
giant
And we
transformer
need to make
boxes.
sure, like I said, the other thing is we need to make sure it's far enough back from the edge of the roadway.
Yeah,
And sometimes the streets aren't wide enough.
right. Well,
Um,
there's one on Berry Lane.
So,
across-
so through the mayor,
Yes.
I'd like to ask the question to the developer here. Is it Rex? I'm sorry.
Rex,
Rex, so did PG&E, did my colleagues tell you that we can't put a pad mount either on the developed property?
No, we could put a pad mounted transformer on the property. The problem is we can't get the primary there, the wire,
Because it's too long.
too long.
Yeah, you get too much voltage drop. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we just to be clear, we put, I'd say on 80% of our projects now in Atherton, we're doing pad mounted transformers on the property.
And you said it's going up to 600 amps?
This
This one's only 400 amps.
Okay.
So we only need secondary, but yeah, I mean, if the only way to get the secondary,
So Rex, if you can through and the city knows how to find me. If you send me an email with the address of the property, let me do some digging.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, let me do some digging and ask some pointed questions.
No.
So thank you.
Yeah.
just a minute. Okay, well, put your hand down.
And if I
I'm
may,
by no means an expert here, but I think I myself have done 20 services in Atherton. So I mean, I think I've seen I've done a 700-foot run from Ridgeview onto the Mesa cul-de-sac that had to go through a neighbor's property. That was a really hard and expensive service. So, I mean, we've done a lot of different things. It's just this one, there's not an option. So that's the thing that's been frustrating.
Rex, I think we're trying to find an option for you. You've got the best minds in all of Atherton here. And Mr. Widmer, Councilmember Widmer, has another idea for you, okay?
So, Robert, if we were to upgrade the transformer that's on the neighbor's property and make it a ground-based one, okay? Could it not be then screened so it wasn't to be,
So the existing transformer is actually under below grade in the street.
I know it's, okay. Oh, so we'd have to move it.
Yeah, so the
So-
suggestion that Bill has is can we upsize the existing transformer that's in the roadway?
And put
Okay.
it onto the constructed property and then have it then spliced over.
We could spend
It
the
is.
rest of the
Yeah.
evening
So
kind of
I-
brainstorming here. Councilmember DeGolia has a question.
So the policy issue that
Yes,
staff is asking.
Yeah.
Involves support or no support for overhead wires. Is that correct? And the reason is because of the undesirability of looking at overhead wires. That's what I understand. This
No.
policy issue is that
That's
we're
not what it
targeting.
says.
This is a policy conversation.
Yeah, so it is a policy conversation.
If I can comment on it.
yes.
I think that the right policy decision is to discourage overhead wires as the Atherton Municipal Code intends to do. I also think that it's intelligent to enable staff to make exceptions when exceptions are appropriate. And I would say one criteria for appropriateness is if somebody can't see the overhead wire. So if they're in this situation, there's an overhead wire that isn't going to be visible by the neighbors in the, all of us that have overhead wires near our properties know that they can be offensive, but
don't like
get
them.
in your line of sight.
Right.
But if, where that's not going to be a problem, then I think it's an exception that should be supported. And I recognize that when you involve the channel, you have particular. And personally, I'd rather have an overhead wire at the regular distribution wire height rather than in a conduit that's just sort of at the top of the channel.
Yeah, flood level.
Feels very risky to me. So I don't have a problem with including an intelligent exception when it's not going to be viewed by others.
Okay, so that's the policy. Councilmember Hawkins
Are
Manuelian.
we simply deciding whether we're going to allow a method for there to be exceptions? Or are we actually discussing what the rules would be that we would allow it, in what case we would allow an exception?
I'm not exactly sure we're
Yeah, so
going
I
that
think
detailed
that
right now.
the initial conversation, and George can correct me, is first off to bring the issues that we are dealing with to your attention. And it is, as time goes on, going to be more challenging. Okay. And so what we're asking is some feedback from you. This is a policy level conversation. Is should we look at trying to figure out some sort of exception policy with strict criteria? And then what avenues is it? Meaning, is it going to be staff level or is it planning and then council? And so as I alluded to in the beginning, is that too easy of a process may nothing to do with this developer, but may encourage folks to go that route rather than something that may be 200 feet away or 300 feet away, if it's doable by PG&E. There's a distinct, in my mind, there's a distinct difference between there's no other option and it's an expensive option.
So I think what we're saying, Robert and everyone, is that at a policy level, we are wanting to give staff the ability to make decision, but we're not replacing our 1966 rules and reg in the building section, right, at this point. And if
at this point, we're not intending or recommending that we change the municipal code at all.
Okay.
It's a matter of typically, if the code says X, staff typically doesn't have the authority to overrule the code. And so if there's a council policy that provides clarification and outlines, well, this is what, to get an exception to the code, then you follow this. And we're happy to work on developing that. But as it stands today, I'm not inclined to say, yeah, well, I know the code says this, but we'll allow you to do that.
Well, but any applicant can come before the planning commission to request a variance and no?
Yeah.
Not to this.
Not to this. And that's
Okay.
why we're coming to you to talk about, well, do we want to create a process by which?
I would say that we do, absolutely. Yes, Councilmember
Yeah,
DeGoey.
I think we're going to have this kind of a situation come up more as greater demands for electricity continue.
Yeah.
And if the standard today is for a new house to have 600 amps and for an additional 300 to 350 amps.
For the
be
ADU.
needed For an ADU, that's dramatically different than it was 10 or 15 years ago.
50 years ago.
And we're going to see more demand for that. So we need to give an avenue for staff to address that doesn't encourage putting up more power lines.
Oh,
But
right.
I think the policy of going underground from the pole to the house, I mean, we probably all have it. All of
All
our
have it.
houses have been built since 1966,
Mhm.
and that's probably true for all of us. I know it is for me. But I want to give staff an ability to look at the situation because I think we're going to see this more and more often.
Okay, I'm going to open it back up. I have a comment that a member of the
Yeah,
public.
Bill Chang's got his
Bill
hand
Chang
up.
also has his hand
Say
up.
what?
Bill Chang's got his hand up again.
He does?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jude,
Jude Kerrigan, Pacific Peninsula. So I just want to make a general comment to Councilman DeGolia's point. PPA's done 250 homes in town. We've been in areas of town that we never thought we'd be in. This is a very unique situation, but it's not the only situation we're dealing with. We also have a house over here across from Holbrook Palmer Park where the power's coming from the back, you know, an easement, a PG&E easement. And the house has been done for over 2 years now, year and a half, and we're still on temporary power because PG&E, the neighbor, cannot figure out how our client is going to get permanent power because the neighbor doesn't want trees cut down in the PG&E easement. So I guess my point is these issues are going to become much more prevalent as, you know, a lot more properties get developed. And I think it might behoove the city to sit down with PG&E and start talking about policy, how to maintain some lines that aren't on the street. Because once again, this is going to become something that's going to affect a lot of future Atherton residents, not only us on the development side, but on, you know, custom homes that we do.
private homes. Okay, thank you. Bill Chang, would you like to?
Hi, again, Bill Chang, PG&E. Two things. One, I'll go ahead and go on the record that PG&E agrees that there should be an exception process. Atherton is unlike the other cities on the peninsula for many reasons, but mainly Atherton's homes are much larger than some of the other cities, and so your electrical demands are a lot higher. And so in order to provide that kind of service, the facilities, the existing poles, the existing lines may have to be replaced for a beefier, you know, facilities to provide that kind of load, especially moving forward when more and more homes and businesses go all electric. Now, in terms of those replacements and whatnot, and in terms of the municipal code, I just want to, you know, respectfully remind the town that there is a utility exemption for these undergrounding ordinances that exist in many cities. And let me try to walk through this as best as I can. When a jurisdiction has an undergrounding ordinance, it tends to apply to the residents, but not to the utility. What do I mean by that? If a utility comes in, if PG&E comes in and needs to replace an existing pole, basically new pole in an old hole, then the utility exemption comes in and comes into play, and PG&E replaces an existing pole, and the pole stays, you know, and the overhead wires stay. When a project comes through, when a homeowner comes through and does a project, either adds to his existing home or builds a new home, and PG&E sees a need to install new equipment that benefits just that one home, then the municipal ordinance, the municipal code kicks in, and that new equipment, which benefits just that one customer, must comply with the municipal code and go underground, and the customer pays for that. Earlier in our conversation here, I think our developer friend used the word betterment. Betterment is when PG&E sees a need to upgrade equipment that would benefit more than just one customer. Usually it's to the benefit of a whole neighborhood. Then the utility exemption kicks in, and the jurisdiction has no say as to the placement of the utility equipment that is to the betterment of the neighborhood, or sometimes even more than one neighborhood. Does all of that make sense?
Yeah. But hopefully PG&E would have a little bit of sensitivity to the environment of which they're making the betterment. And if we don't have, as the town, some input to keep our town beautiful, I mean, somehow we should lobby or get a better PG&E representative lobbyist to help us. Bill?
There is an option, Mayor Lewis. Our friends down in Woodside are looking at creating undergrounding districts in town.
Okay.
So that is something that perhaps Atherton could also consider. It's the it has so undergrounding is sometimes referred to as Rule 20. There are three flavors of Rule 20, A, B, and C. Rule 20A is the town getting credits and you use those credits to underground. The Rule 28 program is essentially over. CPUC ended that program. And then that leaves B and C. C is the easiest to explain. C is when either the town or a private property owner writes us a check and we underground whatever he pays for. The B is a little bit more complicated. B allows the creation of undergrounding districts where the town, a jurisdiction, or a neighborhood even gets together and decides to tax themselves to create the funds to underground undesirable overhead lines.
Mm-hmm. That's appealing. That's something that I think, we've talked about a little bit. Anyway, so thank you all. What else do we need to do?
If the consensus of the council is for staff to come up with some sort of exception process based on the conversation this evening, we can come back with something for a council policy discussion on what those exceptions would be and what that process would be.
I think that would be a very good idea because it seems like the future is here and we don't want to be unprepared. And I'm sorry, guys, we did not solve your problem necessarily, but I know that you'll be able to figure it out.
Well, hopefully with Mr. Chang's help, they will.
And they will. And so I think that will conclude our study session and I will gavel us adjourned. Thank you so much.